I never saw it coming. Ryan and I were supposed to be a team, a power couple, as people like to call us. Both financial analysts, both ambitious, and, I thought, both in love. When I landed a job at one of the top firms in the city, it felt like everything was falling into place. I was thrilled to finally get my foot in the door of a prestigious company, but more than that, I was excited about the opportunities it could create for both of us. Ryan had been struggling to find the right job, so I used every connection I made to help him. I talked him up to my colleagues and even slipped his resume to my boss, vouching for him like my life depended on it. When he got the job, it felt like we'd both won. I was so proud of us, of him. I thought, this is it. We're building the life we always dreamed of. But then Emily showed up. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. Ryan bumped into her at some networking event, and the next thing I knew, he was talking about her nonstop. Emily this, Emily that. She was his high school sweetheart, the one that got away, he said with this faraway look in his eyes. At first, I didn't think much of it. Nostalgia can do funny things to people. But then he started pulling away from me, bit by bit. Late nights at the office turned into late night drinks with colleagues. He'd come home distracted, barely speaking to me. And when he did, it felt forced, like he was going through the motions. I kept telling myself it was just a rough patch, that he was stressed, adjusting to his new job. I even convinced myself to be patient, to give him space. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to admit it. One night, I finally worked up the courage to ask him. We were sitting at the dinner table, the silence between us louder than anything I could handle. Ryan, I said, my voice shaking, what's going on with you? With us? He didn't even look up. There's nothing wrong, Jenna, he muttered, shoving a forkful of food into his mouth. But his tone told a different story. Distant, cold. I pressed him. Ryan, please, you've been so disconnected. I just need to know what's going on. That's when he dropped the bomb. I've been forcing this, Jenna, forcing us, and I can't do it anymore. His words hit me like a freight train. He kept talking, but it was like my ears were underwater. Something about how Emily was his true soulmate, how he never got over her, how being with me made him feel like he was settling. I couldn't breathe. This man I had supported, loved, and helped build a future with, was throwing me away like I was nothing. For her, for someone who waltzed back into his life with nostalgia and a flirty smile. You're leaving me? My voice cracked. I didn't even recognize it. After everything I've done for you? After everything we've built? He looked at me, not with regret or even sadness, but with something close to relief. I'm sorry, Jenna. I just can't ignore what I feel for her. She's the one I should have been with all along. I didn't even cry in front of him. I just sat there, numb, as he packed a bag and left. The tears didn't come until later, when I was alone in the apartment we'd shared, surrounded by the life we'd built together, now reduced to ashes. The worst part? I still had to see him every day at work. I had to sit through meetings where he'd smile and laugh like nothing had happened, while I was barely holding it together. And then there was Emily. She started showing up to events, cozying up to him like they were the picture-perfect couple. The humiliation was unbearable. I tried to tough it out, but every day felt like I was being stabbed in the chest. So, I quit. I walked into my boss's office, handed in my resignation, and walked out without looking back. It wasn't just about Ryan and Emily. I couldn't stand being in that space, surrounded by reminders of what I'd lost. With no job and no relationship, I packed my bags and went back to my hometown. My dad welcomed me with open arms, no questions asked. He didn't need to ask. He could see the heartbreak written all over my face. All he did was hug me and say, "You're home now. That's all that matters." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life. But at that moment, I couldn't see how. All I saw was the shattered pieces of what used to be my future. It was a small, cozy house, nothing extravagant, but it was warm, filled with the memories of a simpler time when life didn't feel so heavy. My dad, a constant optimist with a heart of gold, tried to cheer me up in his usual way. Bad jokes and endless cups of tea. But I could see the toll his illness was taking on him. His once strong frame had grown frail, and there were moments when the energy seemed to drain out of him entirely. Still, he never let on how much pain he was in. He was too busy worrying about me. "You'll figure it out, kid," he'd say every time I stared blankly at the job listings on my laptop. "You're too smart and too tough to let this keep you down." I wasn't so sure about that, but his belief in me meant everything. I threw myself into taking care of him, making meals, running errands, and just sitting with him on the porch while he told me stories I'd heard 1,000 times before. I didn't mind. Every moment felt precious. One thing that hadn't changed about my dad was his weekly lottery ritual. Every Saturday, he'd walk down to the corner store and buy a single ticket. It was his little indulgence, his moment of hope in an otherwise modest life. He'd come home, wave the ticket in the air, and say the same thing he'd been saying for years. "I've got a feeling about this one, Jenna. This is the big winner." I'd always laugh, rolling my eyes at his optimism. "Sure, Dad, and when you win, you can buy us both a yacht." "We'll start with a house," he'd tease. "Then we'll talk about yachts." It was silly, but it was one of those traditions that made him who he was. Always looking for the silver lining, always believing that something good was just around the corner. In those weeks after I moved back, those little moments of levity were a lifeline for me. It didn't take long for me to realize how little time we had left together. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching one of his favorite old movies, he took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Jenna," he said, his voice softer than usual, "I know things feel dark right now, but life has a funny way of surprising you. You're stronger than you think, and you've got so much ahead of you. Promise me you won't let this heartbreak stop you." I tried to hold back the tears, but they came anyway. "I don't even know where to start, Dad. I feel like everything's fallen apart." "Start with you," he said simply. "The rest will follow." A few days later, he was gone, peacefully, in his sleep, just as he'd always hoped. I sat by his bedside for hours afterward, holding his hand and whispering all the things I wished I'd said sooner. I told him I'd make him proud. I didn't know how yet, but I meant it. After the funeral, I went through his belongings, packing up his things and holding on to anything that felt like a piece of him. That's when I found it. His last lottery ticket, tucked neatly into the pocket of his favorite jacket. I smiled through the tears, hearing his voice in my head. "I've got a feeling about this one." On a whim, I decided to check the numbers. It felt like a silly, sentimental gesture, something to make me feel close to him for just a little longer. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone, scrolling to find the winning numbers from the latest draw. As I read through them, I felt my breath catch in my throat. One by one, the numbers matched. Every single one. I stared at the ticket, then at my phone, then back at the ticket. My hands started shaking as the realization hit me. This wasn't just a small win. This was the grand prize. $500 million. "Dad," I whispered, my voice breaking, "you were right. This one really was the big winner." I sat there for what felt like hours, alternating between laughter and tears. It felt impossible, like some kind of cosmic joke. But it was real. The numbers didn't lie. My dad's silly little tradition had just changed my life forever. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the timing. The way it felt like he left me this final gift to help me find my way. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with this money yet, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to waste it. This was my second chance, my fresh start. And I wasn't going to let anyone, not Ryan, not Emily, not anyone, take that away from me. The day I cashed in the lottery ticket felt surreal. I didn't want cameras in my face or my name splashed across headlines, so I made sure to claim the prize discreetly. I wasn't about to let this incredible stroke of luck turn into chaos. I hired a reputable financial advisor, someone who came highly recommended but didn't ask too many questions. We spent hours going over plans, investments, and ways to keep my newfound wealth protected. It wasn't just about the money. It was about building a future that no one could take away from me. Still, the enormity of the situation hit me hard. One moment, I was a broken-hearted woman scraping by, and the next, I had the kind of financial freedom people only dream about. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just money. It was an opportunity, and I wasn't going to waste it. As the days passed, I kept asking myself, What now? I could have packed my bags, moved somewhere tropical, and lived off my winnings for the rest of my life. But that didn't sit right with me. I needed purpose, something that would make my dad proud. My background in finance gave me the answer. I decided to start my own financial firm, one built on the kind of integrity I always valued but rarely saw in the industry. I wanted to create a place where people could trust they were being put first, not used as pawns in a game of profits. It felt ambitious, maybe even crazy, but I couldn't shake the idea. I spent weeks poring over business plans, researching the industry, and thinking about the kind of legacy I wanted to build. Every time I felt doubt creep in, I thought of my dad. Start with you, and the rest will follow, he'd said. So that's what I did. Building the firm from the ground up wasn't easy, but I'd never been afraid of hard work. With my financial advisor's guidance, I allocated a portion of my winnings to fund the business. I hired a talented team, people I knew would bring fresh ideas and share my vision for a client-first approach. We invested heavily in technology, creating user-friendly platforms that made our services accessible and transparent. I poured money into marketing, positioning the firm as a modern alternative to the old-school, profit-driven institutions I once worked for. I didn't stop there. I reconnected with mentors and former colleagues who respected me and subtly reached out to potential clients, offering something the industry sorely lacked: honesty. Slowly but surely, people began to take notice. I worked tirelessly, but it didn't feel like work. For the first time in years, I felt alive, like I had control over my destiny. The firm wasn't just a business, it was a reflection of who I wanted to be. Within 2 years, the firm was thriving. We became the top local player in the market, pulling clients from competitors who couldn't match our personalized approach. The accolades started rolling in: industry recognition, glowing reviews, and even media attention highlighting our innovative practices. It wasn't just about the money, though the profits were incredible. It was about proving to myself that I could succeed on my own terms. Every time I walked into our sleek, modern office, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that was completely mine. My team respected me, not because I was their boss, but because I'd earned their respect by leading with integrity. My clients trusted me, and my reputation as a powerhouse in the industry grew by the day. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And the best part? Ryan and Emily didn't know a thing about it yet. But that, I knew, was about to change. It all started with a headline: "Local financial firm faces decline amid leadership challenges." I stared at the article for a long moment, the name of my old workplace glaring back at me. The firm I had once poured my heart into, the one I'd left behind because of Ryan, was now floundering. A smirk tugged at the corner of my lips. I wasn't surprised. It had been a house of cards held together by the wrong priorities. But now, it was an opportunity. I dug deeper and found that the firm was bleeding clients, struggling to adapt to modern financial trends. Their leadership had grown complacent, stuck in outdated methods. And Ryan? Still there, climbing the corporate ladder as if he had something to prove. The thought of him, likely puffed up with arrogance, made me laugh. Emily's influence hadn't made him sharper. It had made him smug and blind to the cracks forming beneath him. I decided then and there I wasn't just going to beat them in the market, I was going to own them. I approached the takeover like a chess game, quietly and methodically. Using my firm's stellar reputation and significant profits, I began acquiring shares of my old firm without drawing attention. I made discreet inquiries through intermediaries, ensuring no one could trace the purchases back to me until it was too late. The more I learned about the firm's inner workings, the clearer it became that it was ripe for the taking. Their leadership was desperate, and the employees were demoralized. My team and I built a strategy to present myself as the savior they didn't even know they needed. I stayed calm and focused throughout the process, but I couldn't deny the thrill of it all. The thought of walking back into that building, not as an employee but as the owner, kept me going. I wasn't doing this out of spite, though. This was about proving to myself that I could rise above what had once broken me. But if Ryan and Emily got humbled along the way, well, that was just a bonus. The final deal went through on a sunny Wednesday morning. I sat in my office sipping coffee as my lawyer sent me the confirmation email. It was done. I owned the firm that had once cast me aside. News spread quickly. Employees were shocked, their curiosity piqued by the identity of their new CEO. Rumors swirled about who I was and how I had risen to such heights. My name began circulating, but I made no immediate announcements. I wanted the reveal to be memorable. A week later, I arranged an all hands meeting at the firm. The employees filled the conference room, buzzing with speculation. As I walked to the front of the room, I could feel the weight of their gazes. And then I saw him, Ryan. He was sitting near the back, his expression bored, likely thinking this meeting was just another formality. He hadn't recognized me yet. When I introduced myself as the new owner and CEO, the room fell silent. I watched Ryan's face closely as realization dawned. His jaw slackened, his eyes widened, and he leaned forward in disbelief. The smugness he had likely carried for years evaporated in an instant. Ryan approached me after the meeting, visibly flustered. He stammered out something about how he was so happy for my success and always knew I was talented. His words rang hollow, laced with desperation. Emily, I learned through subtle probing, had left him months ago, taking everything she could on her way out. Without her, and with the firm's decline, Ryan had been left clinging to whatever scraps of status he had. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "I'm glad you're still here, Ryan. As an employee, I expect you to work hard and follow the rules. Let's keep things professional." Ooh. The humiliation on his face was palpable. He tried to say something else, but I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, stunned and speechless. For the first time in years, I felt completely in control, not just of the firm, but of my life. Ryan had once made me feel small and disposable, but now I stood taller than ever, knowing I'd built my success on my own terms. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my glass-walled office when I saw Ryan lingering outside. He looked hesitant, his shoulders slightly slumped, a far cry from the cocky man I used to know. I sighed, already knowing where this was headed, but waved him in. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Jenna," he started, his tone softer than I expected. I need to talk to you." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Make it quick." "I have a meeting in 10 minutes. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Look, I know we have history, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I didn't see things clearly back then." I raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make him squirm. He continued, "I underestimated you, Jenna. I never thought you'd rise like this. I guess I thought you'd always need me." There it was, the core of his arrogance, laid bare. I fought the urge to roll my eyes. "And why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice sharp but calm. "Is it because I'm your boss, or because you finally realized you're not the center of the universe?" Ryan's mouth opened and closed as he tried to find a response. I wanted to apologize, and maybe—" "Stop right there," I said, cutting him off. I stood, smoothing my blazer and fixing him with the most professional smile I could muster. "Ryan, whatever you're trying to say, save it. You're an employee at my company now. Personal conversations like this are unnecessary and, frankly, inappropriate." His face flushed. "Jenna, come on. We were together for years." "Miss Reynolds," I corrected firmly. "In this office, that's how you'll address me." The flicker of humiliation in his eyes was satisfying, though I kept my expression perfectly composed. "If you're struggling with your workload, I can assign you additional training. Otherwise, please focus on your tasks. My time is valuable, and I don't have any more to spare for this." I sat back down, returning my attention to the reports on my desk. After a moment of stunned silence, Ryan nodded stiffly and left without another word. The glass walls of my office didn't shield Ryan from the watchful eyes of his colleagues. As he walked out, his face red and his posture stiff, I could see the whispers starting among the staff. "Did you see that? Man, she shut him down hard. I don't know what he was thinking." The murmurs followed him back to his desk. Ryan's usual swagger was replaced by a humiliated slump. He must have realized how far he'd fallen, from the golden boy with a promising future to an employee being publicly dismissed by the woman he had once dismissed himself. I didn't need to read his mind to know what Ryan was thinking as he sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. I could see it in the way his hands fidgeted, the way he avoided eye contact with anyone in the office. He was replaying everything: the decisions he'd made, the things he'd said to me, the life he'd thrown away. For the first time, Ryan was truly confronting the consequences of his actions. Emily had drained him emotionally and financially before moving on to her next target. His career was no longer on an upward trajectory, and his colleagues didn't respect him the way they once did. The man who had claimed to be chasing his true soulmate was now left with nothing but regret. And me? I was thriving, living proof that I didn't need him or anyone else to build a life of success and fulfillment. Ryan was beginning to realize that I was the best thing that had ever happened to him. But it was far too late. As I watched Ryan grapple with the reality he had created, I felt no need to gloat. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply indifferent. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power and showing myself and the world that I was stronger than the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the man who had once underestimated me. The first thing I did after the acquisition was sit down with the leadership team. The firm had been floundering for years, bogged down by outdated strategies and poor morale. It was clear they needed more than a new owner. They needed a complete overhaul. I started by listening. Employees were hesitant at first, unsure if I was just another leader making empty promises. But as I laid out my vision, a firm built on innovation, transparency, and collaboration, they began to see I wasn't there to make superficial changes. I wanted this company to succeed, not just for me, but for them too. Sweeping changes followed. I implemented cutting-edge technologies to streamline processes and introduced mentorship programs to help junior analysts grow. I also prioritized ethical practices, ensuring we worked only with clients whose values aligned with ours. Slowly but surely, the company began to turn around. Revenue increased, clients returned, and employee satisfaction soared. Even Ryan, despite his humiliation, couldn't deny the positive changes. He kept his head down and focused on his work, likely because he realized there was no room for his old arrogance in my new vision for the firm. As the company thrived, so did my reputation. Within months, industry insiders were taking notice. Financial publications started featuring us as a case study in transformation, crediting the turnaround to my leadership. Articles referred to me as the CEO with the Midas touch. Though I knew it wasn't magic, it was hard work and a refusal to compromise my values. Soon, invitations started pouring in. I was asked to speak at conferences, share insights on panels, and even contribute to a book on modern leadership. At first, I felt out of place, standing on stages in front of hundreds of people. But as I shared my journey from heartbreak to triumph, I realized how much my story resonated with others. One particular conference stood out. I was on a panel about women in leadership, seated alongside some of the most respected figures in the industry. As I shared how I rebuilt my life and career, I spotted Ryan in the audience. He was seated near the back, barely visible under the dim lights, but I knew he was listening. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or bitterness seeing him there. If anything, I felt nothing. Ryan had once been the center of my world, but now he was just another face in the crowd. It wasn't easy to let go of the pain Ryan had caused me, but somewhere along the way, it happened. Perhaps it was seeing the respect I'd earned from my peers or the joy I felt in building something that truly mattered. Or maybe it was the realization that my worth had never been tied to Ryan's approval or anyone else's. One evening, after a long day at the office, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city. The skyline was breathtaking, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. I thought about my dad and how proud he would be of what I'd accomplished. I no longer felt the need to replay the moments that had hurt me. Ryan's betrayal, Emily's smugness, and the heartbreak I'd endured had once defined me. But now, they were just chapters in a story that had led to my growth. I'd built a life of success and fulfillment not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I could. As I reflected on my journey, I thought about the people who had supported me along the way. My dad, my friends, and even the strangers who had believed in me when I'd lost faith in myself. I realized I wanted to give back, to create opportunities for others who might be facing their own struggles. Inspired by my dad's generosity and optimism, I decided to establish a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in finance. I called it the Reynolds Scholarship Fund, in honor of my father. The fund provided tuition, mentorship, and internships to students who showed promise and ambition, but lacked the resources to achieve their dreams. The scholarship became one of the most rewarding parts of my success. Meeting the recipients, hearing their stories, and watching them grow into confident professionals reminded me why I'd fought so hard to rebuild my life. I also started a series of workshops for women in the industry, focusing on leadership, financial independence, and resilience. Sharing my story was no longer about proving a point. It was about showing others that they too could overcome whatever challenges life threw at them. The firm continued to thrive, and with it, so did I. I expanded our services, bringing in diverse clients from all over the country. The work was demanding, but I loved every moment of it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. One afternoon, as I walked through the office, I overheard a conversation between two junior analysts. "Did you know Miss Reynolds started this company from scratch after quitting here? She basically took over the entire market," one said. "Yeah, she's a total legend," the other replied. I smiled, feeling a sense of quiet pride. It wasn't the title or the accolades that mattered. It was the impact I'd made, both on the firm and on the people who worked there. Ryan still worked at the firm, though his once flashy demeanor had been replaced by quiet humility. He kept to himself, rarely speaking to me unless absolutely necessary. I could tell he was reflecting on his choices, though I had no intention of engaging with him. One day, he approached me after a team meeting. "Jenna, I just wanted to say, you've done an incredible job here. The company is better than it's ever been." I looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you, Ryan," I said simply. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, but I turned back to my work. Whatever he needed to say, it no longer mattered. I'd already moved on. On the second anniversary of the scholarship fund, I held a gala to celebrate its success. The event was a mix of industry leaders, scholarship recipients, and close friends. As I stood on the stage, addressing the crowd, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My father always told me to live boldly and believe in myself, no matter how difficult life got, I said. Everything I've achieved is because I refused to give up, even when it felt like the world was against me. And I hope that message inspires all of you tonight. The applause was thunderous, but it wasn't the validation I'd once craved. It was a reminder of how far I'd come, and how much farther I could go. As the night ended, I stood on the balcony of the venue, looking out at the city lights. My journey wasn't just about rebuilding. It was about creating a life that was truly mine. And in that moment, I knew I'd succeeded. I was in the middle of reviewing a new marketing proposal when I heard a soft knock on my office door. Glancing up, I froze for a moment. It was Ryan. He looked different. Tired, worn out, almost a shadow of the confident man I used to know. I could tell something weighed heavily on him even before he opened his mouth. "Jenna," he began, his voice low and tentative. "Can I have a moment?" Part of me wanted to brush him off, to tell him to schedule a meeting through the proper channels like any other employee. But curiosity, or maybe closure, nudged me to let him speak. I gestured for him to sit. He hesitated before taking a seat across from me, fiddling nervously with his tie. I don't even know where to start," he said, "but I need to say this." I leaned back, arms crossed, waiting. I didn't make it easy for him, and honestly, I didn't feel like I owed him that comfort. I've made so many mistakes, Jenna. Leaving you was the biggest one." He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my gaze. "Emily's gone. She left after draining me dry, my finances, my pride, everything. And now seeing where I am and where you are, I can't help but think about how different things could have been if I hadn't been such an idiot." His words tumbled out in a rush, raw and desperate. It was clear he'd spent a lot of time rehearsing this, but the pain in his voice wasn't something you could fake. Still, I kept my expression neutral, unwilling to give away how much his presence stirred up old memories. "I wanted to apologize," he continued, "for everything, for taking you for granted, for abandoning you, for not seeing how amazing you were, how amazing you are. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I needed to say this. I needed you to know." I studied him for a long moment, letting his words hang in the air. The old me, the Jenna who had cried herself to sleep after he left, who had doubted her worth because of his betrayal, might have wanted to hear this apology, but the woman I was now, She didn't need it. Ryan, I began, my tone steady and calm. I appreciate your apology, and I believe you mean it, but it doesn't change what happened. His face fell, but I kept going. You made your choice and I made mine. I've worked hard to rebuild my life, to create something meaningful out of the pain you caused. And while I accept your apology, it doesn't erase the hurt or the way you treated me. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the desk between us. I don't say this to hurt you, but to make it clear. We don't have a future, Ryan. Not as friends, not as colleagues, and certainly not as anything more. I've moved on. I've found peace, and I hope someday you can too. His eyes searched mine, as if looking for some crack in my resolve, some sign that I still cared. But there was nothing for him to find. I wasn't angry, and I wasn't bitter. I was simply done. Ryan nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I really do. I guess I hoped. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. I could see the weight of his choices settling on him, the realization that he had thrown away something valuable for a fleeting fantasy. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for him, but it was fleeting, quickly replaced by a sense of satisfaction that I had built a life so strong his regrets couldn't shake it. He stood up, smoothing down his wrinkled shirt. Thank you for hearing me out, he said, and for being kinder than I deserve. I gave him a polite nod. Take care of yourself, Ryan. As he turned to leave, I noticed the faintest hint of tears in his eyes. He walked out of my office with his head down, his footsteps heavy. It was a humbling moment for him, and I hoped it would be the start of some real self-reflection, but his journey was no longer my concern. After Ryan left, I sat in silence for a while, letting the moment sink in. There was a time when I had dreamed of this exact scenario, Ryan realizing his mistake, apologizing, begging for another chance. But now that it had happened, it didn't bring the satisfaction I once thought it would. Instead, it brought closure. I felt free. Free from the anger, the pain, the lingering questions of what if. Ryan's apology wasn't a key to my healing, it was proof of it. I didn't need his validation to know my worth. I had already found it within myself. I glanced at the framed photo on my desk of my father and me, taken during one of our last trips together. I hope you're proud of me, Dad, I murmured. I did it. For the rest of the day, I threw myself into my work with renewed energy. My team had a big project coming up, and I wanted to be fully present for it. The past was behind me, and the future was wide open. That evening, as I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights twinkle below, I thought about how far I'd come. Ryan had once been the center of my world, but now he was just a footnote in the story of my success. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. As I took a sip of wine, I smiled to myself. Life had a funny way of working out. What started as heartbreak had turned into something beautiful, a life I could be proud of, built on my own terms. Ryan's redemption attempt might have been the end of his story, but for me, it was just another chapter in a much bigger, brighter one.